is Thursday, the 18th of October, 2018, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK, and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So I'm sounding more chipper than you might expect post-QED.
Yes.
Partly because it's not post-QED for us.
It's definitely pre-QED.
Pre-QED for us, although QED has been and gone.
Yeah, it does make me wonder why you sound chipper. Because I think you're more likely to sound chipper post-QED, but exhausted. Whereas in the road to QED, it's like, oh, I'm wired, but I'm nervous as fuck.
Pre-QED, Mike's exhausted, but still has to push himself through it. Post-QED, he's exhausted and can give in to the exhaustion.
Yeah, and it's just like...
Yeah, but like chipper's like
face
a mood
down
thing rather than energy thing.
Oh, no, this is an act, mate. This is...
okay.
this is a full-on front. I have not slept for 2 out of the last 3 nights.
Nice.
Just because I did all the normal things that you do. You know, you get undressed and lie down and put a duvet over you and stuff like that. Took my shoes off, that sort of thing. And just didn't lose consciousness at any point, which is something I've been like advocating for on this show for a while. Turns out it sucks
sleep.
when it actually happens.
It's rubbish. I have had anxiety dreams most of the nights of the last, I would say, fortnight.
It's good.
And I've also genuinely felt sick. Like, not just like, oh, I feel a bit sick, but like felt genuinely nauseous or nauseated.
But we've had to tape the show early, partly because it's our normal recording day will be immediately after QED, and that's just not going to fly.
It will literally be the Monday after.
Yeah. And also, Alice, you're not going to be in the country.
I'm technically still in Australia right now.
Yeah. So how's Australia doing?
Great.
The lag between us in this conversation is quite good. Do you remember in the 90s when the BBC would go, joining us now from Australia by satellite is ... and the conversation would have massive lags in it where they go, so how's the situation out there?
G'day.
Well, the situation, etc. Then a huge fucking lag.
So this is a pre-record, and this is going to be really awkward if A, anything catastrophic happens at QED.
Yeah.
B, you die at or after QED, which, now I think about it, I'm not counting as a subset of A, and I don't know why. I would consider, actually, let's go A, and then A2. Something catastrophic. So
E.g.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if anything, this is going to be quite awkward if any one of us die. Yeah. Also going to be a bit awkward if Dave Attenborough dies in the next few days.
That's
going
true.
to also be...
Yes, that is
we're
going to
seem
be a peculiar
insensitive
thing.
people to have not mentioned that. So that's a thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, fun. But Doctor Who was on.
Right, it was, yeah.
New series of Doctor Who has started. Even at the time of recording, the new series of Doctor Who has started.
And I think as the time it's going out, it's been cancelled after a wave of backlash from toxic fanboys.
No, it's been brilliant.
Yeah,
viewing figure has been huge.
Haha, in your face, toxic fanboys.
Biggest overnight viewing figure since, ever, basically. Not ever, but like since 2008, I think.
That's basically ever.
Bigger than the whole of the Capaldi era.
That's understandable.
I have seen, though, lots of my friends saying how great it was and lots of their friends saying they're wrong because the trailers are annoying.
How are the trailers? I mean, they do an annoying trailer afterwards.
The trailer at the end apparently has too many celebrities in it.
Yeah, the trailer at the instead of like, here's some exciting action scenes that are coming up that you can look forward to, it was, here are some exciting celebrity cameos you can look forward to. And they're going, look, Mark Addy's in it. Alan Cumming is in it. Aren't you all excited?
Blimey.
And which is a bit
That's annoying, but trailers are always annoying. Like, there's nothing more annoying, especially, right, in an era...
I just try and switch a thing off before the trailers come on.
Because in an era of people binge-watching box sets, the frustrating thing is we watched Killing Eve, the BBC 3 thing recently. It was, that was 3 or 4 good episodes and then 3 or 4 terrible episodes. It got really, really shit towards the end. But every single one of them would give you a next time on Killing Eve.
And previously at the beginning of the next
You
one.
don't need to do the next time bit when you are online only having released the entire series at once. That's not a useful thing. It got genuinely irritated. Like, find the pause button on iPlayer. Who's got the phone?
But Doctor Who was brilliant. I fucking loved it.
Yeah, you were happy with it?
Marvellous. Absolutely marvellous. Very different feel to the show. Very, very different feel. And the aspect ratio has changed, which is like, whoa. They've changed the aspect ratio. It's not 16:9 now.
What is it then?
It's 2:1.
What?
So it's very slightly letterboxed. Very, very... I'm watching it going, this is very slightly letterboxed.
You're the only person on the planet.
This is the shit that I noticed.
No one has anything that's 2:1.
This is remarkably slightly letterboxed.
We're probably going to get to a skeptical thing at some point. But like, no one has a screen that's 2:1.
No, so
what
it's
screens are 2x1? Like, it's not like a phone's 2x1. They're sort of going for like.
No, it's so it is letterboxed on a normal TVs are 16:9. CinemaScope, like big movies, they're 2.35 to 1. So 2x1, just nobody's doing 2x1. But there we go. Doctor Who's now 2x1. Have that. They never thought they'd do that, did they? Fanboys.
I've been running around Liverpool looking at Giants.
Oh, the Giants have been back in town, haven't they?
The Giants
have been back. I was really grumpy about the Giants last time they were here. Like, really, really grumpy.
That's unfair, because the Giants... So it's worth kind of... Yeah, they're amazing.
They are. They're these enormous marionettes that have, on 3 previous occasions, roamed around Liverpool.
Yeah, and they are enormous. They're like 3-4 stories tall, aren't they?
Did we talk
they
about them on the show previously?
I think we might have mentioned them last time they were here, but that was 2012?
2014. 2012, then 14, yeah.
When I was really grumpy about them.
Yeah.
I was really...
It was a Theatre Deluxe, a French theatre
It's a French thing, yeah.
Run it, yeah.
And so they're these enormous marionettes that have rope attached to them that people, like, to lift the leg of the giant, 2 people have to launch themselves off a crane and hang on to the rope and pull the rope down to lift the leg up.
Throw themselves off a crane and sort of dangle on it like they're ringing a bell.
And last time they were here, I was irrationally grumpy about them being here. But this time I thought, well, it's the last time they're going to be here.
Yeah.
We should go and see them.
No, I thought
Turns
you were
out they're really amazing.
Quite rationally grumpy about them, I think, because they shut down the whole of the city centre for 3 days.
The problem was, so the first time they came, Liverpool wasn't really quite prepared for how much people wanted to see them. And so the entire city came to a complete standstill for the entire time they were there. And I think the first time they spread it out over a week instead of just having it over 3 days or whatever. It was like,
no, I think it was still Thursday to Sunday.
Massive inconvenience. And then then when they came back, I was towards the middle to end of my PhD. I was particularly stressed about PhD stuff, but then also knowing that it shuts down the entire city and the city is not very prepared for the scale of it, I was really frustrated. And then there was a day when I was walking home from work down my usual route from work, and the grandmother had dropped her head. Her head had just popped off.
Just fallen off. Okay.
At this
Happens.
bottleneck point where no people could get past. So she's just stood there in the middle of the road, and there's a massive bottleneck of people that you can't get around. And people are idiots in crowds.
People are idiots in crowds.
The problem is not with the Giants. The problem is that people are just idiots in crowds.
The problem's also with the organisation, because I only saw them on the Friday, and the Friday was great, and they were able to move around. There was the 50-foot tall one over in the world.
They were much better organised this time.
And they weren't, because the Sunday was apparently absolute carnage. They made no provision for the number of people getting down the waterfront on Sunday, because it was something like, a good couple of 100,000 people flooded into Liverpool.
I mean, you look at the photo, you can see photos that people have taken of the entire waterfront, and like the entirety of Liverpool's dock roads and 2 or 3 of the docks around Albert Dock are completely crammed full of people.
Yeah, it was like shoulder to shoulder. Nicola said she had to walk back from town, had to walk like 55 minutes because there was no way of getting back.
Yeah, I'm so glad
otherwise.
I was in town because I went to see the guy on the Saturday. So there was a big
50-foot tall
guy giant 50-foot tall, who's been at every one of the 3 events. Normally he's wearing a old-fashioned diving suit with the metal helmet.
The diving guy, yeah.
Well, you know what that was, the diving thing in 2012? So it was the centenary of the Titanic.
Yeah.
And so the story was a little girl had written a letter to her father who was on the Titanic, wondering for him to come back. And the diver was her uncle, who'd gone and got the letter back out of the Titanic and took a letter from her father to her and found her father in the Titanic was coming back to tell her what happened to her dad. And that's why there was a little girl wandering around and this massive
diver and the little girl. And then the following time they came, there was the diver, the little girl, and the grandmother.
Yeah, and a dog the whole time as well. Cholo's always there, the dog.
Yeah. And then this time it was the diver, but without his diving suit. A little boy who was new, and Cholo the dog. And then they surprisingly brought... like everybody expected them to be bringing the little girl back. They brought the little girl back on the last day.
The dog's amazing, though. So we saw the dog a fair amount, and the dog is, I would say, about 11 or 12 foot tall, something in that kind of region.
Yeah, he's a lot smaller than the other two, which means he's a bit more manageable, I think.
And he's also very well, as a puppet, it's very articulated. So the ears move independently and can turn and can bend, and his nose sniffs.
The nose sniffs backwards and forwards.
So he was right in front of us and sort of bent over and he's got a massive tongue, and his tongue came out, he started licking his leg. We saw him sort of lapping water out of a vat,
there's
a
some
big
great
barrel of water.
photos of the dog.
There's a photo in the Echo, in the local paper, of Nicola reaching up to stroke the dog's nose.
Yeah.
So there's a great photo of her. And she looks as delighted as she looked when she was driving a Dalek around QED. It's Nicola's app. So it got to the point where we were walking around following the big giant when we went over the World for it, and we had to run down a hill to go run past him, and I've never seen Nicola look more joyous. Sprinting across the grass and almost skipping as she runs, watching this amazing kind of giant thing. So yeah, it was amazing.
I must have walked past her on the Saturday I didn't really see them much on the Friday or the Saturday morning, and then the Saturday afternoon I made a special trip out to go and see them. Went to see the diver guy wake up at where he was staying, and then kind of scooted through the crowds. I knew the route he was taking, scooted through the crowds and tried to get around to see him somewhere else. And as I walked down towards the point where the big giant and the little boy and the dog were going to meet for the first time, I reached outside of a hotel where Nicola was apparently standing, stealing their Wi-Fi, and realised it was so packed full of people that there was no way I was going to see anything, and it was just going to be completely chaotic. So I had to make my way through the middle of this crowd of thousands of people to get all the way round the docks, round some of the back routes that most of the tourists wouldn't know, and down onto one of the routes. So I managed to end up getting a really good view of them all walking down, because it was a really long street. They were walking straight down, and then I managed to chase the guy up and watch them sit him down on a little thing that they'd sat him on, which was quite cool to see them manoeuvring this 50-foot giant onto a tank thing. So it was quite cool.
Did you see them at all, Mike?
No, I actively avoided it because I'm just not in a space to be dealing with crowds at the moment. Fuck that.
That's you could have.
Fuck that.
The crowds were insane.
I don't think there was any way you could have just been in a building looking out of a window.
I think part of the reason they're so impressive is when you stand underneath them and you see the size of
they're
them.
Incredible. I only got to see it on Friday because I was down in London on a Saturday because I was at the God Awful Movies Live recording Doing Things Change. So the guys who are here for, we can say now that it's already finished, that they were here for QED. So they wanted to attend QED anyway. They're doing a live show at QED. Yep. Did a live show at QED. It was fantastic, but I can't believe Eli said those awful things. That's not even me joking retrospectively. That's a guarantee.
We just know that Eli's going to say awful things.
He definitely said something awful and offensive. So while they were in the UK, they also planned to do a live show in London and asked me and Andy Wilson from Incredulous down there. So yeah, we had an absolute blast on stage talking about Loose Change and what an awful piece of trash that
it's the 9/11 truth movie, isn't it?
The 9/11 truth movie, the one that started the whole, or started a lot of moving off. Yeah. That was really a huge amount of fun.
So a couple of weeks ago, the BBC's Horizon programme, which is their kind of, science documentary strands thing, they aired a documentary presented by Michael Mosley on the placebo effect, which for some reason one or two listeners thought might be of specific interest.
You did get a few messages about it.
Might be of specific interest to me.
It was more than one or two.
I've no idea why they might think it was something that I'd be specifically interested in. But nevertheless, a lot of people sent this to me. Michael, even when they were when the show was airing, people were live tweeting me going, I bet Mike's throwing stuff at the TV about now.
Yeah. Well, you weren't. You were in the pub.
But I was at the pub. I was at Skeptics in the pub.
And we couldn't convince him to put it on.
Enjoying my my blissful ignorance. So this documentary...
You did start watching it in the pub.
I did have a quick blast on iPlayer while I was there. Michael Mosley is a television doctor who appears on British TV screens fairly regularly, often producing or presenting medicine or science-themed programming.
He always presents medical type stuff, but I'd never gotten that he was a doctor up until you said that he was
Because he is Dr. Michael Mosley. That's like...
Is he introduced as that, though? I always thought he was introduced as Michael Mosley.
Very often
No,
he
it's
is.
Dr. Michael Mosley. I've seen him introduced with his
Maybe I just
medical
look at his face and think he doesn't look like a doctor.
I think he looks a bit like a
I
doctor.
don't think so. He's a bit short.
What?
I don't know why
What
in
is
my head.
this, Alice?
I don't know why in my head.
What, all doctors are tall?
have to be tall, but in my head, doctors are tall.
You know, ladies can be doctors.
Yeah, tall ladies.
Only tall ladies can be doctors. I've been taller than every doctor I've ever seen since I
You know
was
how, like, if you ask
14,
a child
15.
what a scientist looks like, and most
draw a man
most
in a white
children
white coat.
with crazy hair,
They draw a
and
tall man.
most children know that that's not really what a scientist looks like, but that's still the vision they have in their head. Like, I
Yes.
know that doctors don't really look like that, but in
Yeah.
my head, doctors are tall and thin.
Tall and thin as well now. So they're thin as well.
And like wearing a very, very smart, well-ironed suit. Just in my head.
Wearing a tie or no tie?
Tie,
They've got
definitely a tie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I dress like a doctor, but I'm not a doctor.
You're not a doctor. You're not a doctor. Even though you bang on about placebo effects like some
All
sort
the
of
time.
medical researcher.
All the time. It's a
And yet,
disgrace.
like most of the doctors I've met, and I've met a lot of doctors both through my work and through the fact that I see doctors all the
your
fucking time.
general life.
Like, most of them do not fit that criteria, but for some reason, if I have to think of a generic doctor, they're a tall, thin person.
That's just medical doctor. That's not all doctors.
No, academic doctor is a guy in a fleece.
Right.
Always in a fleece.
Alice, you do know you're an academic doctor.
I know.
And you still picture a guy. You
So,
actually are one. And you can't picture yourself as one.
as for an academic doctor, I always think of the same person.
Laurie.
No, not Laurie.
Oh, okay.
One of my academics, not kind of mentors, I guess, in the past, Ian, who just is generic, laid back, bloke in green fleece,
Right.
academic type person. And I don't know why, but he is my go-to generic academic.
Blimey. Well, there you go, Mike.
Well, as best I can tell, Michael Mosley is a real doctor. I think he does have a
He's
medical
qualified, yeah.
Was he wearing a green fleece at any point?
degree. He may or may not be wearing
He's
a
not
green
an academic
fleece.
doctor.
Well, he might be. We'll find out if he's got a green fleece or not.
According to Wikipedia, he studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University before deciding he wanted to become a psychiatrist and enrolled in the Royal Free Hospital Medical School. But after graduating medical school in 1985, he decided that actually the psychiatry stuff was really boring and he didn't enjoy all of his lectures. And so he applied to the BBC to become a TV producer rather than going into clinical practice. So although he is a medical doctor, he has not practiced medicine at all, as best I could tell, or at the very least not since 1985 when he became a TV producer and journalist.
Which is not unlike Edzard Ernst, who obviously did a medical degree and then went on to become a researcher, and I don't think went into practice at any point.
I was always going to do a medical degree and then decided it was too hard work.
Well, he's still got time.
Decided to go into an academic degree instead. Not any easier.
I was never going to do medicine.
So Mosley's work for the BBC has included documentaries such as 10 Things About Weight Loss, The Truth About Exercise, Living with Parasites, and E-Cigarettes, Miracle or Menace, which is definitely not a false dichotomy at all.
He did like the TV show on the 5-2 diet.
He
didn't
did. That's the thing he's most famous for, is popularising the 5-2 diet, which was the topic of his documentary, Eat Fast and Live Longer.
I'm interested in you saying that the dichotomy between miracle and menace is a false dichotomy. So you're saying there are things that can be both a miracle and a menace?
I think there's middle ground between miracle and menace.
Gosh, I think, God, what's a miraculous menace? Like,
But that's not the general definition of a false dichotomy.
I know, that's why
You're
I
a
went.
skeptic who knows false dichotomies well.
I know, but I
why
went
did
there
your brain
first.
go there?
Well, just because it's not like if you're a skeptic, you have to know it or not, Alice. That's a false dichotomy. You can know bits of it. No, but I was trying to think, God, what would be a menacing miracle? And I'd be like, well, would it be like turning the water into wine, but doing that at Alcoholics Anonymous?
Putting like images in flatbread, but it's like images of Fred West.
Yes. Oh, God.
So, I'm menaced and it's a miracle.
Or it's turning water to wine, but just doing that specifically in a goldfish bowl. Killing people's fish.
Menacing miracle. This time around, Mosley was investigating the placebo effect for Horizon.
That's a lovely goldfish you've got there. It'd be a terrible shame if someone got it wasted. If someone got it absolutely pissed up.
The documentary was titled The Placebo Effect, Can My Brain Cure My Body? ? One of our listeners, Martin, described this documentary on Twitter as having taken every paper I've talked about on Skeptics with a K and made a TV show out of it, which actually isn't bad as far as assessments go, to be honest.
They've missed a few, but they covered a lot. Covered some good ground.
There's a lot of crossover here. So they talked about placebo surgery.
Yes. God, they did.
They talked about it for
not about
bone
the knee
spurs.
surgery, it was the shoulder bone spur.
The acromioplasty. So they talked about the bone spurs example, not the knee surgery example.
I don't know if you're going to go into more detail on that surgery thing later, because they do talk to the surgeon, and the surgeon at the end of it says, "Yeah, I don't do this placebo surgery anymore. I just don't do it."
Well, I'm coming to that.
Okay, gotcha.
So from the programme, it says the operation involved removing a spur of bone from the shoulder, which was thought to relieve pain. Volunteers were randomly selected to receive either real surgery or a fake procedure. And we talked about this in detail on episode 219 after it was cited by Adam Conover in Adam Ruins Everything. Patients were randomised to get either decompression surgery, sham surgery, or no treatment, and the results showed no difference between sham and real surgery, but were different from no treatment, which might sound like a win for placebo, because it was better than no treatment, except that the difference between no treatment and placebo was not actually clinically significant, and as the paper says, the difference between surgical groups and no treatment might be the result of, for instance, a placebo effect, or the post-operative physiotherapy.
Yeah.
Could have been that. Could have been that either. Because it turns out patients in both the sham and real surgical groups were given post-operative physiotherapy, and of course patients in the no treatment wing did not get that.
They even say that in the show.
They do.
They say, so we don't send these patients for surgery anymore, we just send them for physiotherapy.
We just send them for physiotherapy.
Because that was the bit that was doing something.
Yeah. Horizon goes on to interview one of the patients from the sham wing of that study, a woman named Carol, who is happily pruning plants in her garden, saying that she couldn't have done this before she received the surgery.
She didn't have a garden then.
Carol quite clearly describes how she enrolled in the trial during a particularly bad flare-up of her symptoms, which means there was a good chance that regression to the mean is a contributing factor to her improvement. And the programme describes how she was taken into theatre and the doctors were told she was in the sham group and so did not remove her bone spurs. Carol then tells Horizon, "I was in a lot of pain afterwards. I had to have my arm in a sling for 4 or 5 days, and then I had some fairly minimal physiotherapy, and then gradually over weeks it got better and better."
But physiotherapy can be very minimal to have really
a
huge
therapeutic effect.
In fact, I've been recently seeing a physio for, what I thought were problems with my ribs, but it turned out my ribs had then caused spasms all the way up my back, into my shoulders. Like I was having all sorts of lower back and upper back problems as well. I think my physiotherapist gave me 2 exercises. Mm-hmm. One was to lie on my back, pull my knees up to my chest twice a day for 10 seconds each time. And the other was to lie flat on my back with my feet on the floor but my knees raised and move my knees from side to side 5 times on each side twice a day. Yeah. That was enough to have a massive difference because it turns out he tailored it to what specifically the problem was. Yeah. Yeah. It can be really minimal and have huge effects.
And Michael Mosley says in the voiceover, Carol had experienced a miraculous recovery, possibly due to the experience of surgery triggering a rush of pain-killing chemicals.
But that would be immediate.
Yes, it would.
Yeah, it wouldn't take weeks.
Because for some reason, Mosley has decided to try and credit Carol's recovery to endogenous opioids, which the whole documentary seemed oddly obsessed with, that it just kept going on about endogenous opioids.
Well, even in the description of the documentary, it mentioned that. It says, the brain is actually capable of producing its own drugs, and these can be more powerful than prescription painkillers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is true, that
it's just got nothing
endorphins can be a good thing, but then that's not placebo.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
So maybe it was due to a release of endogenous opioids, which came as a result of the surgical intervention. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe that boost of painkillers allowed Carol to make use of her shoulder, which helped strengthen it, which then led to recovery because she previously wasn't using it because it hurt and the painkillers meant that she could use it and that bit of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or maybe the actual painkiller she had during the surgery actually did that. Or maybe it was regression to the mean. Or maybe the actual physiotherapy, which is an actual treatment which she actually had, which the published data for this paper says could account for this effect. Maybe it's that. Maybe it could be that thing.
Loads of psychological things that come into it as well. She might have tried physiotherapy before, but this time she did the physiotherapy in earnest because she thought the surgery was going to help.
And we do have a a compliance thing. When you're taking part in a trial, you're more likely to do it and do it properly and do it right than you are if you're just getting
as opposed to all the other
treatment.
times. She's been to physio or whatever and said, well, you should be doing these exercises every day, but no one does what
there's definitely a compliance effect with people who are involved in trials.
There's a filter effect here as well, because if they aren't talking to the patients who didn't feel an experience from it. So they found a patient who's willing to say, oh yeah, I got a benefit from this. So I don't know how many people are involved in that trial. It only takes one of their testimonials to make the claim. But Mosley goes on, since the trial, Andy, who is the surgeon, has stopped doing acromioplasties, which is the surgery. After all, he proved that removing the piece of bone made little difference. He isn't tempted to perform the fake operation either. While the placebo effect did help some patients, this isn't enough to justify the risks of surgery, and he now recommends physiotherapy instead, which I think is an astonishing characterization, surely driven by the program's desire to present a positive narrative for the placebo effect. The paper demonstrates that the operation was a waste of time. It concludes that the positive effects previously attributed to surgery could be the result of post-operative physiotherapy. The surgeon who conducted the trial has stopped doing the operation and now recommends the physio instead. But Horizon still characterised this as the placebo works and the only reason we don't do the fake operation now is because surgery is risky. The final 10 minutes of the programme are focused on the work of Dr. Manfred Shedlowski, who they say is working to leverage the placebo effect to improve tissue rejection rates for organ transplants. Yeah.
And that sounds like something very measurable.
It should be something very measurable. Quote from the show, and this is Dr. Shedlowski himself, says, if a patient receives a new organ, say a kidney, these patients normally have to take lifelong immunosuppressive medication. But these drugs have toxic side effects, which is, of course, doing a lot of harm to the patient. Too few drugs and the body will reject the organ, too many and they'll poison the patient. So we're talking about tissue rejection and immunosuppression. So, of course, the conversation turns to lavender-flavoured drinks, which we talked about at episode 221.
Yeah.
Patients were given immunosuppressive drugs along with a special drink made of lavender and strawberry milk. Eventually, the drugs were taken away, but the immunosuppression continued in response to just the specially tasted drink alone. Except that it required multiple challenges with the distinctive drink to get an effect, and the immunosuppressive effect wasn't anywhere near as large as it was with the real drug, and it's unclear how long-lasting this effect would be anyway. All this demonstrates is that human beings are susceptible to classical conditioning, sometimes called Pavlovian conditioning.
Which Horizon does actually say he's making use of Pavlovian conditioning.
Yeah, Horizon says Manfred's solution was to resurrect the 100-year-old theories of the Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov. Every time Pavlov brought the dogs in his lab's food, he would ring a bell. After a while, the dogs started to associate the sound of the bell with the food and would start salivating whenever it rang. So they know this is Pavlovian conditioning.
Yeah, it's also weird to say he decided to resurrect it.
As if we didn't know.
There was Pavlov, and then his dogs died, and they went, oh, well, there's the end of that then. As if his test were to see whether dogs who can respond to ringing a bell would live forever. Yeah. It's like, well, we've got an n equals 3 that's not the case, so we'll shut down this thing.
Alone,
but arguably, you could say that conditioning does make up a portion of the effect seen in the placebo wing of trials. I don't think it's what most people understand by the term, the kind of effect that requires a conditioning phase where you have to train patients to respond first. That's not
it's
really
not
what
placebo.
people think of when they think about placebo effects.
If you're being charitable, you might say that some people would include it as a form of placebo. But
especially patients who are unintentionally conditioned to respond to things in certain ways, like the Parkinson's patients, for example, where they have their Parkinson's meds and that gives them dopamine release, and eventually you give them fake pills that don't have a dopamine release and they have a dopamine response anyway. You could say that, we could say maybe that's classical conditioning. We don't know. I don't know how you check
also
that
imagine,
kind of thing.
I mean, I'm not an expert in those areas, but imagine if you did switch out their Parkinson medication for placebos that don't include a dopamine thing, and they get the dopamine as a part of their conditioning. There'd be a tail off to that, you'd imagine.
I would imagine
as
so,
they stopped
we don't know how
thing.
long this effect is going to last. We don't know. But you could give this lavender-flavoured drink to patients without conditioning until the cows come home. They're not going to have immunosuppressive effects.
Yes, yeah.
It needs the conditioning phase for this to actually do anything. Not only that, but Mosley's description of Pavlov's experiment is actually completely wrong. The bell thing is an urban myth. Didn't happen.
Oh, really?
Did not happen. What actually happened was that Pavlov's lab assistant, whose job it was to feed the dogs,
was called Bell.
He noticed that every time he went into the kennels, the dog started to salivate because they're like, "Oh, fucking Jim's here to feed the thing."
There. Yeah.
When they noticed that, they thought, "Oh, I wonder if we could get that effect from something else." And they actually trained the dogs to respond to a metronome.
Oh,
rather than a bell, it was a metronome.
One of the ones from the Metro Centre.
Yes. But regardless, that it's a common mischaracterization of Pavlov's research, partly because Pavlov's research was all presented in Russian at the time. But regardless of that, Michael Mosley tries to replicate the lavender drunk study on himself by spending a week taking caffeine tablets rather than immunosuppressants.
Yes!
Together with a lavender drink.
This was frustrating.
While playing a game that's designed to test his reaction times before and after taking caffeine.
Yes.
After a week of conditioning, he tries...
/ a week of practice.
Exactly.
Indeed,
exactly.
Yeah.
That annoyed the fuck out of me that they didn't mention that.
After a week of conditioning, he takes just the drink without the caffeine before playing the game and gets a better score than any other time that he has played without caffeine, even though it is still below par compared to his caffeine times.
Yes.
Which demonstrates exactly fuck all.
Yeah.
Because this is an uncontrolled, unblinded case study with a single participant who's doing it as a stunt for television. It might show that he's conditioned himself to have faster reaction times when he tastes lavender, or that he's trying harder on the run because it's what's going to work best for the cameras, or he's just had practice, or some other reason.
He's just getting better because he's doing a thing lots
every
of times.
day.
Yeah. You're going to get better at that because it's a skill.
There are thousands of uncontrolled variables here. Who has the faintest idea what was going? It could have been entirely staged and completely fictitious for the cameras. I don't think he would be that deliberately deceptive.
No.
But it could be that.
There's
we don't
lots
know.
of options out there. It needs to be controlled.
A million things that could be going on here. The bulk of the program, however, was taken up by an experiment which was designed specifically for Horizon. They recruited 117 patients who were struggling with low back pain.
Apparently this is the largest study ever.
Largest study ever with 117 fucking patients.
Maybe it was the largest ever study of patients with back pain from Blackpool.
They split them into two groups. I don't know if this was randomly or not because the program doesn't say. They were told that one group was going to get a new drug and the other group was going to get a placebo. In fact, everybody was given a placebo. But one group was given a standard 9.5-minute consultation with a GP first. The other group was given a bumper 30-minute consultation with a GP instead.
So we probably all got some notes on that 9.5-minute conversation. But the one thing that stood out to me is it cut to the expert, who I'm sure we're going to talk about subsequently. And they said, well, we're now going to have 9 minutes, 22 seconds consultation, because that's the average time of the average consultation on the NHS. And said, right, the average time. So that includes all the ones where you go in.
Where run over.
You go in. It takes a minute because you're saying, hey, the thing hasn't gone away. Could I get a bit more of the stuff? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
See, come back in a week. That's gonna. So don't take the average time. Take like the median time or the mode time, or find a different one that isn't skewed by the shortest consultations.
Yeah.
Or the longest consultations.
They held the consultations in a disused medical centre, which they'd commandeered for the purposes of the experiment. Patients were made to wait in the waiting room before their consultation, and the programme implies this was because waiting is part of the NHS experience, rather than something which was strictly necessary. So they're really taking the Daniel Moorman approach here of it's all about cultural meaning and white coats and how many helipads the hospital has and things like that.
Yes, they lit torches on the way in to simulate the landing strip of the airplane that would bring you in. They built themselves some bamboo control towers.
Yeah.
The
pills themselves come in bottles with intimidating warning labels and a shiny brand created specifically for the show. The capsules are large and they are blue and white because this has the largest effect on pain, a claim that we'll come back to.
The capsules are large in sound.
That's
that was just
time.
for you, Alice.
Long time since we referenced that. Good Lord. And of course, the patients filled out a self-reported questionnaire before and after the study to assess their pain.
Yeah.
So,
and they did daily video diaries.
They do the daily video diaries. We'll come to the daily video diaries. What were the results on this? According to Horizon, 45% of the patients reported a medically significant improvement from baseline, whatever that means.
Yeah, they also said that this proves that the doctor's behaviour is, quote, as powerful as some drugs for some things.
Yes.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Which I loved as a phrase, yeah.
Brilliant.
Some drugs for some things.
Yeah.
But medically significant improvement, does that mean clinically significant? Does it mean statistically significant?
Well, this is the problem with doing a study for a TV show rather than publishing it in a peer-reviewed journal where you have to talk about what the methods were.
Yeah, they just don't define what that actually means. Maybe medically significant has a defined, understood definition that I'm not aware of.
Or maybe they've just got a medic to look at it and go, significant.
Yeah. But across both groups, 45% of patients reported a medically significant improvement. Now, between the two groups, 38% of patients who got the 9-minute consultation reported a medically significant improvement, compared to 51% of people who got the longer consultations reporting a medically significant improvement.
They did these timed consultations in a really weird way. Like, if 9 minutes, 22 seconds is the average NHS appointment time, and I've had a lot of appointments with doctors, and I've had appointments that are both longer than that 9 minutes and shorter than that 9 minutes, as you'd expect with that being an average. I have never once, and they laboured this point on it. They laboured the point that the doctors at the end of the consultation for the short time were saying, and we've run out of time. Like, bluntly ending the consultation so that the patients felt rushed out. I have never had a single doctor ever make reference to the time length of any appointment I've ever had, even when they've had me in and out in 3 minutes. They might apologise for the delay of the time, and there has been an occasion where a doctor has said, I want to do this investigation, I think you need more time than I can do in a single appointment, so let's book you in for a double appointment in a week's time. But at no other point has any doctor ever said, oh, we've run out of time. Like, they manage their time completely without referencing that to the patient. A patient's never going to feel rushed in an appointment, even though a doctor does have to keep it to one.
I suspect some patients will feel rushed.
Maybe.
I think...
But that's more likely to be the patients that are going in wanting extra. Like, there's a lot of patients who might go in with 5 problems because it's actually the only time they've seen a human being that week.
But I think it's also there is an element that I'm sure there are some doctors for whom it does, because I've heard these experiences come up when people talk about what they like about NHS homeopathy when that was still a thing, and what they would say is the doctor just isn't listening to me. They are just rushing. I spoke to one person who said their doctor, their oncologist, spent the entire time looking at the screen and never looked at them once while they were talking about their cancer treatment.
I could imagine that to be more the case for specialists, and I have seen plenty of specialists, and I felt more dismissed by specialists than any GP I've ever seen.
But I imagine it's just going to be the case for some. There's a range of human behaviour, so I think there are some people who are going to feel rushed by some doctors, but it's not the average experience.
Exactly, I don't think it's a rule, and I think by including that in their study, they're introducing a bias to the two different tests.
It very much is a bias. You're absolutely right.
No p-values, obviously. Of course there isn't. But also a weird way to conduct the study, to my mind, because they report the outcome based on who responded and who didn't. Not the mean response, not on average patients had a N% improvement or an N% decrease or whatever. Just like these people responded.
They turned it into something
these
binary.
People didn't.
Yeah, I mean, and some of that I think is because of television. It's quite useful to be able to see the people separated, but they should still have then said, and here's what the numbers actually say if they're expecting people to pay any attention to this.
That's not how we would do that kind of study. You wouldn't just take the people who responded and go, there we go, 38% of people responded to treatment and the rest of the people didn't. That's not how you do this kind of study.
Wow.
It's a very peculiar thing. So the problems with this trial are vast. First off, these were all people struggling with chronic low back pain. Everything is shit for low back pain. That is the nature of low back pain. We are terrible at treating low back pain. Typically, I would expect to see patients like this with a chronic condition enrolling in a clinical trial at the peak of their symptoms. Because you have a flare-up, you go to your GP, tell them that you're struggling, your GP goes, oh, actually, there's this trial we can put you on. And so it's when you're in a flare-up that you get enrolled in a trial. Now, this isn't a typical trial. This is a TV stunt. I don't know how these patients were recruited. Were they recruited through a casting call rather than through, going to their GP? So it may or may not be that they were having a flare-up at the time that they were enrolled.
But and also it's TV, so it's probably, even if they were recruited when they were having a flare-up, by the time they came to do it, they may not have been having a flare-up because things don't happen instant in television.
So if we are to assume that they were sampled evenly, to try and be fair to the study, then even by chance alone, some of those participants will be having a good day, some of them would have been having a flare-up, which means that some of them will improve just by chance, some of them will get worse just by chance because statistical regression. However, the outcome measure is improve or not improve.
Yes.
Which does not account for the fact that statistical regression might mean that some people are getting worse. The people who are getting worse just count as not improved.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Yeah.
So we got 38% of people in the 9-minute consultation group improved, and the rest of them
just didn't improve.
But it could well be that it's like 30-30-30, basically.
Yeah. It's a similar effect to that scam where you predict the sex of a baby. Give me £20, I'll tell you the sex of your unborn baby. If I'm wrong, I'll give you a refund. I'm only going to be wrong about 50% of the time, so I only have to give half the money back, and I get to keep the rest. So I'm a net up because it's just a right or wrong situation. They also seem to have made efforts to load this study up with as much bias as they possibly could. They refer to this on air as maximizing the placebo effect. I call this stuffing your study with confounding variables. The warning labels on the bottles, the length of the GP's appointments, the clinical settings, all of which will have an effect on the pain that a patient reports, but we don't know that that's the same thing.
You're no longer just testing the pill.
Yeah, you're not testing the pill at that point. We don't know that the pain the patient reports is the same thing as an effect on the pain the patient is experiencing. We don't know that. My favourite example of that is the Weschler 2011 asthma study, where patients are given sham inhalers or real inhalers or no treatment, and patients given sham inhalers reported an improvement that was almost as large as the real albuterol. But when they measured their lung function, it showed that the improvement was actually comparable to no treatment. The report did not match the reality even slightly. There was a vast difference between the reported outcome and the actual outcome.
But in fairness to them on that regard, at least, this is talking specifically about pain and about back pain. So
pain
that is
subjective,
very subjective. But they could have an objective endpoint in there of were you able to walk today or were you wheelchair bound today, which is one of the things that kind of comes up. Or were you able to go to the casino and play poker, or did you have to stay at home and have breaks and things?
But the biases that they've introduced will modify reported pain. We just don't know that maps to a modification of the pain the patient is experiencing, even subjectively experiencing, because we don't know that they're not just saying, well, yes, I'm feeling a little bit better, thank you, doctor, even though they're not, because they don't want to look stupid on telly.
Which I noticed, and I can't remember which part of the documentary it was, but there was a part of the documentary, that was it, where the patients are told that it's a placebo, that there's no medication in it, and then they're asked to continue taking it and say how they feel afterwards. And the way the question is phrased very much leads them to either say, they're still working, or be silent because...
Are you going to carry on taking this? Is kind of the question that they're asking.
It's really odd.
And then it also seems there's a bit where the Michael Mosley in the voiceover says, out of all of my volunteers, one in particular interested me, which is another way of saying, here is the story that's most likely be an outlier. Here, of all of the cherries, this one looked juiciest. Even if you're not intentionally doing that because you're telling us for TV, that's exactly what you're actually doing.
So you have the desire to please an empathetic clinician who's trying hard to try and help you out. You've got the effect of being excited about being on television. You've got compliance effects because you're taking part in a study, again, especially because for the telly. All biases that can change patient reports without actually changing anything in the patient. There's confirmation bias too. There's one guy who reported feeling dizzy after having taken the pills and saying, at least I know I've got the real drug because I'm feeling dizzy.
That's quite a well-studied effect, actually, that we know that happens, and people will use that to convince themselves that they're on the real medication.
In fairness to that, I think at that point, he says, because I'm feeling dizzy, so that can't be the placebo. And I think the researcher or the doctor says, well, actually, it could still be the placebo.
Well, no, that's Michael Mosley narrating. He's watching back the video diary.
Oh,
he's not.
I thought that was there.
Told that. No.
Okay, sorry,
the patient isn't told that. The patient isn't told that. In that specific case, the guy was saying, I'm feeling dizzy, I'm having a side effect, therefore at least I know I'm on the real shit. But confirmation bias means that people are also more likely to be charitable when describing improvements to their symptoms as well. They're more likely to report no effect as a minor improvement. They're more likely to report a minor improvement as a bigger improvement, and so on. The patients were all asked to keep video diaries, as we referred to earlier. They had camera crews visiting them as well. So maybe they were trying harder. Maybe they were complying better with their standard care.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to make a fool of themselves on telly. Because, it's and there was
they'd all be doing that, though. That's not just of the ones who were given
but they were all on placebo as well.
So they're counting any win as a win for placebo.
Course, they weren't saying. Yeah.
We'll come to that in a second. There was one guy towards the end who says, "I've made a fool of myself now," and it might have been the same guy who said, "I was feeling dizzy, therefore I know I'm on the real stuff." And then later in the program, he goes, "I feel like I've made a fool of myself now," which is then a motivation for him to say, but these placebos must be really helping me, because therefore he hasn't made a fool of himself.
Yeah.
Also, the thing there is that he's willing to say, "I've made a fool of myself." All the ones who aren't willing to say that don't say that, and then that doesn't come out in the data.
Yeah.
So there's another bias there of like, "Oh no, I'm feeling better." Yeah.
The big thing for me is that there is no control group.
Yeah.
There is no treatment wing to see what would have happened. There's no standard care arm. If anything, this experiment could be said to show the difference between the length of GP appointments, because that's actually the only variable between the groups. It is literally the only variable between the groups.
That's what some people being charitable to the study took away from it. So talking to people about this, they said, well, I think the main thing to take away here is that if you spend more time with a doctor, you might be in a better mood and a better sense of things, and maybe that will improve your well-being.
So this is a bollocks uncontrolled study, which is not even capable of showing the effect that it claims to show.
But Mike, it got a man who was in a wheelchair out of his wheelchair.
So does Peter Popov, though.
Exactly. It's not about in the moment. It's very much about, is he still in the wheelchair afterwards, and how does he respond to having been out of the wheelchair for a bit?
Yeah. And also, the guy you're talking about there specifically is a patient called Joe, who's in a wheelchair, and they make a big thing about how he used to go sailing a lot, and he can't go sailing anymore, and then they take him on a ship, and he's like, "Oh my God, I've not been sailing in so long." There's a line at the very start where they're talking about his sailing where he says, "I don't go sailing anymore because I can't get the insurance."
Yeah.
Oh, is that what he said?
Yeah.
Not because I can't get on a boat, because it's too hard for me to move around on a boat, or
and he can't
etc.
he can't get the insurance because of his myeloma.
Yeah.
Not because of his back pain.
Yeah.
Because of his cancer.
I didn't spot that because I watched that bit and thought, all right, he's on a boat now. He can't normally get on a boat, but he doesn't normally have an entire film crew helping him onto a boat. He's in a wheelchair on the boat.
Yeah.
So if the issue is I'm in a wheelchair, how do I get on a boat?
Yeah.
And
I'm chuffed that the guy's on a boat, and that was a big emotional moment to be like, he's not been on a boat in years. That was brilliant. I loved that.
Yeah.
And I think that doing this TV thing could have genuinely helped that person. I think there's a lot of people who experience chronic pain who are so frustrated by their chronic pain who end up feeling like they can't do anything. And then by feeling like you can't do anything, your body deconditions because you don't do stuff, and then you get worse and worse and worse. And then sometimes you do just need that kick just to get back on your feet
and
again.
if there's that depression spiral, that means if you're depressed about not being able to do anything, you don't do your exercise, which means you get worse as well.
Yeah.
And
he's been given that nudge to get back into some level of activity, and he seems to be having a genuine benefit from that,
which is great, and
which is good for him.
And that could also be true of the woman who goes to play poker at a casino rather than online poker.
Well, that was another thing as well, is that they show the woman playing, she plays online poker at home regularly. And then here she is now. The implication in the show is she's feeling so much better. She's going to a casino. It never said that she doesn't go to casinos. It just says she doesn't do it often.
Yeah. And she was feeling so good. She decided to go to a casino.
Yeah,
it's not like she's able to get to a casino now. But
but with Joe, the guy in the wheelchair, it might be the case that just because he's, I'm on this new thing, I'm doing it. You know what? I can do this. I can get out of my. And actually, he could have always gotten out of his chair.
Yeah.
He just never had the motivation to try before.
Which is the Peter Popov thing. It's exactly the Peter Popov thing.
Yeah.
You've given me magical permission that I'm now able to walk, and then in an hour's time, when I'm feeling the effects of having done that, you're not going to be around and no one else is.
But then there's the pill colour.
Yeah.
The consultant on this program is Jeremy Howick, who is a placebo effect researcher based at Oxford University and director of Oxford University's Empathy program, which is an interdisciplinary research group investigating the role of empathetic interactions in healthcare. On camera, Jeremy Howick tells Michael Mosley, quote, "There is a lot of evidence that white and blue pills seem to have a greater analgesic effect, a pain-killing effect."
Yeah, I wrote the note down the same,
A lot of evidence.
A lot of evidence.
Is what he says. But we talked about pill colour on the show quite recently.
I thought it was blue for depression.
And we didn't come across a claim about blue pills for pain. Now, maybe it's in the literature, maybe it is.
I thought it was red for pain.
I've not read the whole literature, but you're right. What we found was red pills for pain. That turned up in the systematic reviews that we looked at. But blue pills were better as sedatives, not as painkillers. So I searched around and I looked through PubMed and I looked through Google Scholar and I couldn't find an instance where blue and white pills were said to be better for pain. Never mind a lot of evidence. I couldn't find any evidence that this had ever been a thing.
You couldn't find evidence in the medical literature. Did you find evidence anywhere else, Mike?
I wasn't able to find any evidence at all. So I contacted Jeremy Howick. I just sent him a message on Twitter and said, do you have a citation for that claim? Because I've found the systematic reviews and it's not in there. And he responded very quickly as well. He said the citation is de Crane et al. 2001. The evidence is not robust, and Mormon claims that this effect is culturally dependent.
So he told Michael Mosley there's a lot of evidence of it. When questioned at all, he says it's not robust and it's culturally dependent.
It's not very robust. Yeah.
So you've looked at the study before as well.
This has gone from a lot of evidence to the evidence is not very robust. And this reference to it being culturally dependent is a reference to blue pills for sedatives. Blue pills as sedatives don't work very well in Italy because blue is associated with their national football team.
Missouri, yeah.
And so that blue gets Italians worked up rather than calmed down.
Wow.
Whereas culturally, blue is kind of like sad, slow, depressed in the rest of the world.
Dabba-dee, dabba-die.
So we've gone from a lot of evidence on camera to not very robust on Twitter, which is something Jeremy Howick seems to have done in the media before. Because when he was promoting his book, Dr. You, Revealing the Science of Self-Healing, a book described by Deepak Chopra as a breakthrough book, and which features Jeremy Howick barefoot and cross-legged on the cover.
Okay.
When he was promoting that book, he wrote an article for the Daily Mail in which he made several claims about placebos, about how more dramatic interventions show larger placebo effects, about how placebos work without deception for irritable bowel syndrome. He made claims about knee surgery and so on. So I wrote to him at the time. I sent him an email and challenged him on those points. And he came back and said, it may surprise you that I agree with most of your points. A lot of the difference seems to arise from the fact that this is a complex issue and the caveats can't all fit into a short article. Which I think is genuinely remarkable. And then, as now, Jeremy Howick makes a large general claim in the media and then backpedals when challenged on the details. On top of all that, and the real kicker for me, is that the paper he quoted, de Crane 2001, does not demonstrate that there is a lot of evidence that blue pills are good for pain, or even not very robust evidence that blue pills are good for pain. In fact, the word blue does not appear in the paper. This is not a study on pill colour. This is a study on whether positive messages delivered with pills increase reported analgesia. It's not even a pill colour study. The word blue is not in the paper. You do us find in that paper, the word blue does not appear. He may have meant to cite de Crane 1996, which is a systematic review on pill colour. In fact, it's the one we talked about on the show a few weeks ago. The one that said blue pills were better as sedatives, not as painkillers. And even then, that was p-hacked data with mad assumptions about how you're waiting for surgery, therefore you're anxious
and therefore you can't sleep. Yes.
Therefore, we're going to report mean sleep offset time as our primary outcome measure.
Yeah.
So all in all, I think this was a poor effort from Michael Mosley from the BBC. It totally oversells the size of and nature of placebo effects and leaves patients and the public with a very misleading impression of what this all means.
I saw people from skeptical groups sharing the article, sharing the video, sharing the BBC programme, saying, wow, this is fantastic, this is amazing. It just shows that we need to just really be aware of how powerful placebos are. Yeah. Doctors need to make more effort to use this. And I thought,
I've had academic researchers send it to me. And say similar things.
Yeah. The programme concluded by saying, our study has shown that the brain is more powerful than we'd ever imagined. It has the ability to produce its own painkillers, and for some of our volunteers, these were more powerful than prescription drugs. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
No.
Your study demonstrates nothing of the sort, nor was it ever capable of doing so.
It didn't even mention prescription drugs in it.
No. It's poorly designed, it's poorly controlled, it's an interesting TV stunt, and I can't really have a go at them for doing an interesting TV. So that's exactly what we did with Shoozy Bands.
Yes, true.
It wasn't a fucking robust study. We did the best we could for a narrative that we wanted to put over. We tried our best.
We tried our best, but most importantly, we said that. We said this is a stunt. I'm pretty sure we did.
Well, we got a little carried away with the conclusions on that study, and we did an episode on the show afterwards where it was specifically actually Simon Singh got in touch and said, you've kind of oversold the conclusion here. And we went, yeah, you're right, Simon, we have. And we talked about on the show about how we'd oversold the conclusion. What we'd said at the end of the Shoozy test was, our test shows it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What we should have said is, our test does not show it works.
Yes, exactly.
Which is a subtle difference, but it was a mistake we made, and we hold our hands up on that one, and we did at the time. So I can't really have a pop at them for doing a TV stunt. We've done TV stunts, YouTube stunts, but, it's a legitimate thing to do. But it is a long way from our study shows placebos are more powerful than prescription drugs, which is the claim that they're making at the end of this show. He goes on to say, maybe it's time to start taking fake pills more seriously. Perhaps even start prescribing them on the NHS.
We've only just got them on.
Or maybe it's time for journalists and doctors to start doing better on placebos.
Sticking with the theme, on the day the show aired, the BBC also published a news article written by Michael Mosley, which summarised some of the pieces seen within the show.
What was the news article called, Alice?
Oh, the article title keeps frigging changing. It is now called Back Pain and the Placebo Effect, I'll Keep Taking the Pills. It was originally called something very similar to the title of the show, like placebo pills cure back pain, or can it cure back pain, or whatever. Then it was changed to just I'll keep taking the pills, and now it is Back Pain and the Placebo Effect, I'll keep taking the pills. In this BBC article, Michael Mosley also pointed to evidence. So the entire article is kind of set up first talking about the guy who'd been in the wheelchair, who had then had such a positive response.
The cherry.
And then it had gone on to talk about the study that the BBC had commissioned, that you've quite nicely taken apart, Mike. But then they did point to some scientific evidence supporting the use of placebos, saying, now many people that believe that the placebo effect is a con and that it only works on the gullible.
I mean, I would point out that I'm quite scathing about the placebo effect. I wouldn't say it only works on the gullible.
No.
That's not how bias works.
I mean, you think it's a con, but it's a con perpetrated on the researchers rather than the patients.
Yeah.
So the researchers are conning themselves, as it were. Yeah.
They go on to say, but that's not what the science shows. A recent small study looking at the characteristics of back pain sufferers who responded best to placebo treatment found those who were most aware and open to new experiences had the most benefit. The researchers also carried out brain scans and found anatomical differences in the responders and non-responders. Michael goes on to say, among other things, they found subtle differences in areas of the brain, like the amygdala, which controls emotion and reward.
Now, I think that's an interesting effect where they say you're more likely to respond to placebo if you're someone who classes yourself as open to experience. Because I think open to experience is a synonym for open to bias.
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, it's one of the markers that comes up when you look at belief in conspiracy theory and belief in paranormal. So Chris French's work, and I think even Rob Brotherton's work, has looked at that sort of stuff. And there's one of the markers, and it's one is distrust of authority, but the other is openness to experience.
Yeah,
and I think this is a big deal on the placebo point. Is that I think one of the areas, and this is speculation on my part, but I think one of the areas where there is a disconnect between what medical researchers are doing and the stuff that we're talking about is that because we've come from this background, I'm going to sound like Johnny Ball here, where he says, I know all of science, which is why I'm better at science than scientists is.
Yeah. Tell me about the farting spiders, Mike. Tell me about the farting spiders.
Because we come from a background of skepticism and paranormal research and, okay, why do people think they see UFOs? Why do they think they say ghosts? We're very aware of the effect that bias can have.
It's definitely the lens that you look at things through.
On the things that people say in a way that medical researchers
and how important bias is even for intelligent people, which seems to be the thing that we're getting here is it only works on the gullible. No, these things work on... The reason it works on people who even know it's a placebo is because we're open to bias in so many different ways.
And maybe if they had people like Chris French or Richard Wiseman on some of these placebo papers who could authoritatively be able to speak about... Actually, no, bias means that this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And actually, we know from our research the rates at which this is going to happen. So maybe we can control for that or adjust the effect or whatever. I think that might be where some of the disconnect is.
A much more interesting conversation to have about placebos. If we could get the medical consensus to agree that placebos do not work apart from in managing bias and making patients feel like they feel better, it could actually be useful in things like chronic pain, where we don't have good treatments, where taking lots of medications probably isn't sustainable long-term for patients. We could hijack that bias. We could help them to feel subjectively better and actually give benefit to patients. But by trying to make it this medical magical pill, it's not helping.
In Horizon, we had variously the release of endogenous opioids, the classical conditioning, the pill color, the bottle, the clinical setting, the biases, all that, and they're all described as if they're the same thing. This is all the placebo effect.
And then there's all the stuff they didn't describe, like regression to the mean, various other things like that, cherry picking.
All that kind of stuff that wasn't mentioned,
when in reality, actually giving patients more accurate information is what's more helpful. This is why there's some evidence that pain management programs are actually useful for patients with chronic pain, because it's giving them the information that they need to manage their own condition. Unfortunately, it takes quite a long time to do a pain management course, so it's hard for doctors to prescribe them to patients.
Even things like the acromioplasty study, the bone spur study, where it looks very much like the effect has come from the physiotherapy, which you could characterize as an unrecorded parallel intervention. It's kind of recorded,
it's semi-recorded,
it's still the effect is coming from a parallel intervention, not the thing that you're actually studying.
So, according to this BBC article, this study apparently finds 1, people with certain personality types had the strongest responses to placebo. 2, that people who respond to placebos have changes in brain structures that look different to people who have no response to placebo. And 3, the underlying assumption is that the placebo effect does work, at least in some people. The study was linked in the article, so I could go off and have a look at it. It's titled Brain and Psychological Determinants of Placebo Pill Response in Chronic Pain Patients, and was published in Nature Communications in September this year. The article begins, the placebo response refers to an improvement in symptoms caused by receiving an inert treatment, which I'm not sure is the best description of placebo.
Caused by the inert treatment.
The placebo response refers to an improvement in symptoms caused by receiving an inert treatment.
That is a very odd way of describing that, I think,
And it does take into, that could cover classical conditioning. It could cover all the other forms of bias that we know do get taken in but under that placebo research, but would probably be more reasonably described as a separate form of bias.
But what's interesting about that particular description is they seem to think that it's prompted by the administering of the pill, whether it's the pill itself, but it's certainly prompted by the administration of the pill, which rules out regression to the mean.
Yes.
It rules out unrecorded parallel intervention. Stuff that would happen anyway, no matter what's going on. Anything that would happen in a no treatment arm is ruled out by that, which is not an unreasonable thing to do. Say if it would happen in a no treatment arm, it's not a placebo effect. Except very little of the placebo literature makes that distinction, and the effects seen in the placebo arms of trial will include regression to the mean and unrecorded parallel interventions and so on.
The article continues, placebo responses are observed universally in almost all randomized placebo-controlled trials, RCT, including those testing chronic pain treatments. There is a set of papers referenced after that claim, 4 papers.
Okay.
2 of them are reviews from Kapchuk, which we've discussed the major issues with these papers in an earlier episode. One of them refers to a single study, a paper from 2007 looking at acupuncture for low back pain.
Right.
Do you know that one, Mike?
Off the top of my head, I don't know it.
Okay, because I just assumed by this point you know them all. Top of your head.
Know them all.
Just give him the year first and we'll see if he'll get it.
And another from 2015, which considered placebo responses in RCTs for neuropathic pain.
Okay.
The paper from 2015 found that the difference between pain treatment responses and placebo responses reduced over a 25-year period, or 23-year period between 1990 and 2013, and concluded that, therefore, that placebo responses are increasing, without excluding the possibility that, in fact, new pain treatment options are getting worse. They did show a slight improvement in placebo response compared to a slight decreased treatment response over time, but failed to exclude that this might be because we've gotten better at accurately distinguishing between placebo and treatment responses.
That's what I was going to say. As we're seeing actual treatments get weaker and weaker compared to placebo, what we might actually just be seeing is we're getting better at measuring stuff.
Exactly.
In exactly the same way that when people talk about parapsychology, all of the psi results of the 70s are getting smaller and smaller to a point they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Parapsychology being, is this just a area of study that's all noise, no signal?
Yeah.
It's the same effect. It's the decline effect. The decline effect started off as something that was in parapsychology. It's kind of moved over into mainstream science.
Spooky. It's been infected like body snatchers. Invasion of the result snatchers, the effect snatchers.
Where the size of placebo effects, the size of the effect of an active treatment seems to decrease over time, and the size of the placebo seems to increase over time. But I think that's just because we're capturing more variables in our placebo arms because we're getting better at doing trials.
We're more accurate at distinguishing between the two, and we're better at designing studies. So of course, that's going to change over time.
Stuff that was previously not captured by the placebo arm would have looked like a real effect in the active treatment arm in the data.
Exactly. Coming back to the brain structure and personality study, the authors go on to point out that the neurobiological mechanisms underlying the placebo effect have been primarily studied for acute responses to conditioning-type manipulations of suggestion-based paradigms in healthy individuals, usually performed in a laboratory setting, which probably is quite accurate. Like, a lot of this stuff is conditioning or suggestion-based stuff that's probably misappropriated to placebo. They elaborate that the translation of such findings to clinical settings is questionable, not only because chronic pain patients exhibit distinct brain anatomy and neurophysiology, but also because such patients are repeatedly exposed to a myriad of medical rituals which may bias expectations towards treatment. They then go on to discuss apparent prior studies that hint at change in brain structure relating to a response to placebo. The problem is that their examples are a bit odd. So firstly, they mention a study comparing a lidocaine patch to placebo treatment in chronic low back pain, failing to mention that there's little evidence to support the use of the topical anaesthetic lidocaine in low back pain, except when the pain is neuropathic in origin, which isn't all chronic low back pain.
Yeah, I mean, recently when NHS England looked at getting rid of homeopathy on prescription, one of the other things they also looked to get rid of was lidocaine patches. Yeah. For exactly the same reason that there wasn't good evidence for it.
Insufficient evidence. The only evidence you can find is there's a couple of papers that say lidocaine patches, we've got early hints that it might be useful in chronic low back pain, proper, well-designed clinical trials needed, and then 15 years later we still don't have that. Like, they've probably been done, they haven't been published because they were negative results.
Yeah.
There's nothing more on lidocaine patches. The second study they refer to is one that looks at the difference between duloxetine and placebo in patients with osteoarthritis. Again, missing the caveat that duloxetine, which is an antidepressant, is only likely to be effective in patients with a neuropathic component to their osteoarthritis. They do also point out that neither of these studies had a no treatment arm for comparison, which they go on to use to justify their own study, which they describe. This prospective cohort study, including 4 neuroimaging sessions, a large battery of questionnaires assessing personality traits and pain characteristics, and a proper no treatment arm that allowed us to disentangle placebo pill-related analgesia from non-specific effects. The authors explain, the primary aim of this study was to identify the psychological factors and the brain properties collected prior to placebo treatment that would determine placebo response. But you'd imagine the first thing they'd want to do is check that the patients were indeed responding to placebo. I think their phrasing in their introduction is quite telling already. that they are making an assumption that the placebo response exists, because they did look at whether the placebo effect was happening in their patients. So they explained that they took 129 patients with chronic back pain and assessed them for eligibility. They took forward 63 patients for analysis who were eligible. The participants visited the lab on 6 occasions over 8 weeks, which doesn't really move away from the lab-based testing they've been previously critical of, but still. They had brain scans taken on 4 of those visits 2 to 5. And at visit 2, the participants were put onto a treatment. They were split into 3 groups. They were put onto treatment number 1, were treated for 2 weeks. There was a week washout period. And then at visit 4, they were given treatment number 2 for 2 weeks, following another week washout period. Participants were split into 3 groups. 52 were given placebo. 25 had no treatment, and 5 had an active treatment, which was naproxen twice daily and esomeprazole twice daily, which is the general, they said was the kind of general treatment for low back pain. I don't think there is a general treatment for low back pain.
Yeah.
But they didn't study the effects of this active treatment because they only used it so they could legitimately tell patients they might get an active treatment or a placebo effect without lying.
Right. Okay.
So they didn't even analyse those 5 patients. By the end of the 8 weeks, they had 20 patients left on no treatment, 43 left on placebo, and 4 on active treatment, meaning they lost roughly 20% on all 3 of the.
That's quite a chunky dropout as well. That's quite a chunky dropout. 20% dropout rate, I'd be concerned about. Yeah.
The active, but none of only 5 of the patients were getting any actual treatment. The active versus placebo treatment was double-blind. The no treatment arm was unblinded. During the 8 weeks, patients were asked to monitor their pain on a score of 0 to 10, with at least 1 score per day using a smartphone app. In reality, many patients filled in the app several times per day. They counted all of those additional scores unless there were 2 scores given within a half-hour period, in which case they took the second score as the true score.
So I guess that's to cover people saying, oh, I'm in a 5. Oh, shit, it's got really, really bad. I'm in a 7 now.
Well, no. So they included people whose pain had changed over the day. They kept those scores. If in a half-hour window they'd recorded 2 scores, they assumed that they'd made a mistake, that either the app had malfunctioned, they didn't know it had submitted, something had gone wrong. They'd hit the wrong number or whatever.
But that's variance from the protocol. It was meant to just be once a day, but they were doing it multiple times a day, so they used the data points anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
To assess responses, the researchers used these scores. So this is how, when they refer to responders to the placebo effect versus non-responders, they were using these app input data that the patients had decided whether they were suffering on a scale of 0 to 10.
The app input thing just reminded me of something I saw online the other day. You know, you get the Fitbit-enabled scales. Someone pointed out online they were getting some weird results on there, and they realised it's because their cat was sitting on the scales once a day. And so they had like a daily weight of their cat, or like several times a day their cat was accidentally weighing himself.
Why does a cat want to sit on a scale? Isn't it cold?
Well, they'll just wander about. It depends what the scale's like. My cat likes to do anything in the bathroom. If you're in the bathroom, she wants to be in there.
Well, yeah, Lupin does that, but he still doesn't sit on the scale.
If the scales was out, at some point she'd step on the scale.
Lupin avoids standing on things that are going to be uncomfortable to him.
They like squares and stuff as well. Cats like to like boxes. If you draw a circle, the cat would like to sit in the circle just because it wants to know what that's all about.
So they use these scores to assess the responses to placebo. If the difference between baseline measurements and treatment measurements were small, then the patients were classed as non-responders. And if there was a significant difference between baseline and treatment measurements across a resampling test where random resampling was undertaken 10,000 times, then the patients were classified as responders. So they did this so that they could account for both of the 2 treatment windows, because they had treatment 1 and then treatment 2, which were both placebo anyway, but they wanted to account for that.
Yeah.
Using the phone app ratings, the authors found that there were 24 responders in the placebo group, equating to 55% of the patients. And in the no treatment group, there were 4 responders, equivalent to 20% of the group. They also considered the magnitude of the response by subtracting the average score during the baseline from the average score during treatment, using the highest difference between baseline and either of the two treatments. So they went for maximising
the effect there.
The effect.
Yeah.
Well, take the average or something like that, yeah.
I don't like this responders versus non-responders thing that crops up in placebo effect research. It's kind of cherries versus not cherries.
What's especially weird is that they separate out. So they do refer to the fact that there were 4 responders in the no treatment group. But then when they put them on graphs together, they've got placebo responders, placebo non-responders, and no treatment all lumped in together. It's like, you've got the data for responders versus non-responders.
Yeah.
Separate. If you do something to your treatment group, do the same to your no treatment group.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're biasing your results.
But it seems like p-hacking to me to just take, let's gather all of the people who seem to have an effect and analyse them separately from the people who didn't have an effect, rather than looking at the total of your group.
It does.
And see what the effect is.
And the total of your group is a third of them feel an effect, a third of them are exactly the same, and a third of them actually get worse.
Yeah.
You're saying, 2/3 of people didn't not have an effect.
Yeah.
It sounds a lot like p-hacking. And especially when they're then looking at the magnitude where they're choosing the highest
maximum
difference.
version, yeah.
The results showed that the percentage analgesia difference between no treatment and placebo treatment was significant, which is to be expected. The no treatment patients knew that they were undergoing no treatment, so
you got broken blinding there, so that's not necessarily a surprise.
It's to be anticipated.
It's a reason why we blind trials.
And the authors were looking for the largest difference between baseline and treatment, merging the two words. But when they plotted the placebo non-responders alongside the no treatment measurements, they look very, very similar. I can't actually show you this because I've got the printout of the paper.
We can't show the listeners, though.
No, but we can put the PDF in our show notes. So
theoretically.
That graph there, the top 2 are your placebo non-responders versus your non-treatment.
Okay.
And the one where you've got a percentage difference is your placebo responders. The group you've selected as the group with the largest effect.
But the so-called non-responders look identical to no treatment.
Exactly. But they kind of show what is expected to a degree, because they do show a slight difference between overall the placebo versus the no treatment. The placebo responders account for 55% of the group, were the only ones who had this large percentage decrease in pain intensity. But even then, that percentage change was less than 30% in all cases. So it's relatively small. Now, any painkiller would be dismissed as ineffective at less than 30% change in pain.
Isn't that for bullshit reasons, though?
Well, yes.
Because placebo accounts for the first 30% of any painkiller.
Because placebo accounts for 30%.
Yeah.
Which this paper nicely shows that it is less than 30%.
Yeah.
Even when they've selected out the strong responders. They found a statistically significant difference between no treatment and placebo treatment when considering the magnitude of response, again, which you would expect because it's unblinded, and a statistical difference between the placebo responders and non-responders. But then when they look at the pain questionnaires they took, investigating the numerical rating scale of pain intensity and memory of intensity of pain, or even the qualities of that pain, the statistical difference starts to disappear between the placebo and no treatment groups. In fact, there's a couple of points. I've put lines through all the ones that show no significance in this figure, and it is the vast majority of them. There's somewhere, so some of them they've put on top of the 2 bars NS for not significant.
Yeah.
And on some of them they've put the typical star for a bit significant.
Yeah.
2 stars, 3 stars.
Yeah.
And then on some of them, they've got an ampersand.
Ampersand, yeah.
Which they don't easily explain, apart from the figure legend, where they say for that, they mean P is less than 0.12.
So fuck all.
Totally irrelevant.
P of 0.12 is not, it's not even like it's twice 0.05 or something.
Yeah. No,
it's just all over the table, all over the place.
oh, some things are like, they're nearly significant. No, they're not. It's still not significant.
I tend to, and I had some criticism for this. There's a hashtag on Twitter, isn't there? That's still not significant.
And I did put snapshots of this on that hashtag.
Where it's got, so you get a p-value of 0.07 or 0.08 or something like that, and people go, oh, it is approaching significance.
Yeah.
You go, still not significant, though, is it?
It's trending towards significant.
Yeah. Still not fucking significant, though, is it? I tend to go the other way. If something's 0.04, 0.03, I go, it's barely fucking significant, though, is it? And I get criticism for that. I go, well, it's still significant, but I would rather err on the other side.
The point
you're not living by publishing law, Mike.
The point in statistical significance is you've got this cutoff, and that cutoff you have to define your cutoff before you do the testing.
Yeah.
And that cutoff is binary. That is the purpose in it.
Yeah.
So it either is or it isn't. But there are very good arguments that using p-values for statistical significance is not good enough.
Yes.
And you could use that to throw out p-values altogether.
Yeah.
But erring on the side of caution is outside of the usefulness of p-values.
Yeah.
It either is or it isn't. It's binary.
And there is, because the line that we've got for significance is typically 0.05.
Yeah.
That's just a convention.
It is a convention.
That's just what we've decided.
It can be 0.01, it can be 0.001, it can be...
There is a...
0.12.
Apparently 0.12.
There is a group of people who think 0.01 should be our line for significance, in which case stuff that I'm going, barely fucking significant now, is it?
It's hugely significant.
Is if the line was 0.01...
Oh, 0.01, it would be... miles away,
would not be significant at all. Wouldn't be significant at all. But they seem to arbitrarily go, 0.02. It's better than 0.02. It's better than 0.02. 0.102 is what, 88%? It's
terrible. But I don't understand why they've done it, because I don't understand why have star or NS. And then put this random additional one in the middle.
And that's
really
really
admit
weird.
that it wasn't significant.
No, exactly.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
And so I've put lines through anything with any of those. And the only ones that show any level of significance are their phone apps that people have put in how they're feeling at that moment in time, which is entirely subjective. And they are just showing a difference between no treatment and placebo, which is entirely unblinded. So they're showing roughly what we know about the placebo effect. If anything, their results say the placebo effect is even worse than we think it is. But the authors did see a statistical difference between their placebo responders and their placebo non-responders, which makes sense because they've cherry-picked them. They've gone, all right, you guys do really well on the placebo effect, you guys don't.
Yeah.
Look, we found that these guys do really well on the placebo effect and these guys don't.
Yeah.
You've selected for that. They've put people with high variation between pain scores in one group and people with low variation between pain scores in the other. For me, this makes the rest of the study almost entirely pointless. And for the first few days that I had access to this paper, I just refused to read the rest of it because I was like, it's irrelevant.
You were sending me grumpy messages on WhatsApp going, this is fucking terrible. And I wanted to write back and go, that's how I feel all the time, Alice.
Alice, when did you get access to this paper? Was it when the Giants were in town? Because that explain why did you just get grumpy? You just had a different direction for your grump.
There wasn't a reliable difference between placebo and no treatment. So the difference between placebo responders and placebo non-responders is basically negligible because it's variation amongst no variation. But let's at least talk briefly about some of their other findings. Just keep in mind that huge caveat that the entire assumption that this study is based on hasn't been proven to be true in this study. The authors say, first, we sought to identify psychological parameters predisposing chronic back pain patients to the placebo pill response from a battery of 15 questionnaires with 38 subscales collected at visit 1. They found that, on the whole, there were no real differences in personality traits or psychological factors or treatment response expectation between the placebo responders and non-responders. Now, that goes against what is conventionally believed about placebo effect. We think that treatment response expectation does play a role in placebo response. They didn't find that. They saw no real differences, personality traits, psychological factors, or treatment response expectation between their responders and non-responders. But they did find that responders scored more highly in terms of openness from one assessment and from 4 of 8 subsets from a second assessment, which included not distracting yourself from your pain, attention regulation, emotional awareness, and self-regulation. But these were only findings from 2 assessments of the 15 that they undertook.
Right.
So to me,
bloody love cherries in this. They fucking adore them.
So they've got 5 subsets: openness, not distracting, attention regulation, emotional awareness, and self-regulation. They've apparently got 38 subscales from 15 questionnaires. They found 5 subsets from 2 questionnaires of the 15. Nothing. The authors continue. We secondly sought for anatomical properties predisposing chronic back pain patients to placebo pill response at visit 2 prior to their treatment 1, and found that comparing subcortical volumes between placebo response and placebo non-response was not informative. Given the recent evidence that subcortical volume asymmetry can provide a brain signature for psychopathologies, we followed up examining interhemispheric laterality of the combined volume of these 3 structures, which sounds an awful lot like clutching at straws. Look in the literature, see if there's something else we can look at. They then said the placebo responders showed rightward subcortical limbic volume asymmetry compared to the placebo non-responders, and this asymmetry was observed in all 4 visits or scans, which they confirmed with a second piece of brain segmentation software. But remember, this is between the placebo responders and non-responders, which are group sizes of 24 and... For some reason, I've not put the other number, whatever.
Yeah, 40, but it's still buttons in it.
Whatever it was, 43 minus 24.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Absolute buttons, yeah. And if you think you've discovered an anatomical structure that predicts whether you are susceptible to placebo or not, well, great, do that study. Find a load of people with this structure and a load of people not, and see if it predicts. We'll
come back to prediction, because they tried really hard.
Okay.
They went on to say that whole brain cortical thickness measurements showed that non-responders had a thicker cortex in the right superior frontal gyrus than responders. These anatomical properties also mildly correlated with the magnitude of placebo response. Like, even the way they've worded it makes me think that's never going to be reproducible. It only mildly correlates. That's definitely.
How many ampersands did they use for that?
Next, they used resting state functional MRI based on previous placebo studies to look at regions of the brain that might be functioning differently in responders versus non-responders. So they're only looking at parts of the brain that have been identified in other placebo studies. It is very much a fishing expedition. I would have anticipated that they would find something from that, from the fact that they've just gone looking at every different part of the brain that's been ever associated with placebo and looked for a change in functional MRI, which we know can be hard to interpret at the best of times.
That's a part of the issue with this study is they've gone, right, let's look for an anatomical difference between this group of people and that group. But they're not specifying what that is. It's just, let's find anything.
Let's find something. Some difference. They still didn't find very much. They found some variation between some of the brain regions they looked at, but for some they found neither a main effect nor an interaction effect of group times time, like multiplied by time. Those findings that they did feel confident on were not impacted by whether the patient had been exposed to a pill or not.
Okay.
So, completely aside from their own definition of placebo and aside from their own title, where they specifically mention pill response, brain and psychological determinants of placebo pill response in chronic pain patients.
Not actually affected by whether you've taken the pill.
Their response is not correlated with exposure to the pill.
Jesus.
Next, they looked at whether they could use machine learning to examine these minimally existent effects, which failed. So even machines couldn't do it. They also attempted to predict the magnitude of response using machine learning, using n equals 1 patient to train the machine, which failed. Then they attempted to use the questionnaire data to predict the magnitude of response, and it wasn't predictive enough.
Good God,
so they think it was predictive
when you said they tried.
They fucking tried. they did find that they couldn't apply what they learned between the responders and non-responders in the placebo group to the responders and non-responders in the 4 and 16 people in the no treatment group.
Right.
But big surprise there. They really went at it to try and prove the predictive power of these brain structures, and they have very little evidence, let alone that these placebo responders are actually responding to anything, because they're no different to no treatment, very minimally different to no treatment. It's a major fishing expedition, and I think they've just published it because they just want to get it off the desk, basically. They've done all this work. They need to publish it. They've somehow managed to publish it in Nature Communications, which is slightly worrying, but
they've also somehow managed to get it to be the basis of a BBC article and arguably, possibly even a TV show.
Yeah. Overall, this paper was based on an unproven assumption and made conclusions that were weak at best and had limited predictive power. Far poorer conclusion than Michael Mosley would have us believe.
Okay, so that was a bit of a mammoth show. So we're not going to plug anything. We're not going to waste everybody's time. Alice, you're in Australia anyway. Marsh, me and you were fucked. So,
I'll tell you what I can plug. I listened to a podcast investigating NXIVM, which NXIVM is the... Fuck off, Alice, laughing at the fact that we just had...
We talked for 5 minutes about whether we had anything to plug, and you've only remembered something
well, it's
when
not mine.
we decided not to.
It's not my thing to plug,
Okay,
but it's a thing. I listened to a podcast investigating NXIVM, which is by the CBC in Canada. And it was an investigation into the weird sex cult that was run by, or co-run by, the blonde from Smallville, Alison Mack.
Okay.
Who was like branding people with people's initials.
I remember
and all
that.
sorts
Yeah.
It's a proper look. There's a 7 or 8 episode deep dive on what happened there, an interview with people who were involved, and it's really, really weird. It's properly weird stuff.
Excellent. I mean,
it's an astonishing story.
8 episodes, not a deep dive, mate. Try like 2 years of solid content.
Yeah, but the person who made it's probably going to make a book out of it, Mike. So they'll actually write a book. So yeah, that's a deep dive. Yeah,
true.
So people, if they're interested, should check that out. Investigating NXIVM. NXIVM is spelled, I think, NXIVM.
Okay. Aside from that, then, that is all we have time for.
Yeah.
All that remains then is for me to thank Marsh for coming on today.
You're right.
Thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.